There are things you only see clearly when death is standing in the same room as you. Not across the street, not somewhere in the vague, comfortable distance of the future. Right here, beside the bed, in the corner of the room where the light doesn't quite reach. Close enough that you can feel the coal coming off it, the way you feel a willway left open in December, before you even cross the room to close it. I am 94 years old. My body is failing in the specific, unhurried way that old bodies fail. My hands shake when I reach for my morning glass of water. Some mornings it takes me a full minute to remember where I am, to place myself back inside in my own life. But a mind is still sharp enough to carry regret. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. Not death, not the mechanics of a body slowly returning to the earth. I've seen a lot in my time, but it's not the years that wear you down. It's the stories you carry, the lessons you learn. I want to talk about the wound that never closed, the one that had nothing to do with the cold or the years, the one that didn't come from enemies or strangers or the indifferent cruelty of the world, the wound that came from trust. From the deep, unconditional, completely unguarded trust I placed in the people who said they loved me. Because I was a man who believed in loyalty the way some men believe in God, completely, without reservation, with a faith so total that I never once considered what I would do if it failed me. And here I am at 94 years old, and I can tell you with absolute clarity, faith was the most expensive thing I ever possessed. If you have ever placed your entire heart in someone else's hands and watched them, slowly or suddenly, treat it carelessly, then what I'm about to say will find thing in you has been waiting to be named. Stay with me. I grew up where a world loyalty is not just for virtue. It was the architecture of everything. My grandfather built his life on it. My father preached it at the dinner table with the same conviction. A minister preaches scripture. The community around us confirmed it in every story, every lesson, every unspoken rule that governed how people move through the world. Stay close. Honor your blood. Trust the ones who have always been there. The world beyond your door is cold and indifferent, but the people who love you, they will never let you fall. I absorb that belief the way a child absorbs language. Not through study, not through conscious decision, simply through breathing the same air as people who held it as truth. And for the first half of my life, the evidence seemed to support it. I married a woman I genuinely loved, not the performance of love that some people mistake for the real thing, but the difficult, unglamorous, steadfast kind that grows stronger in the difficult seasons precisely because it has roots deep enough to hold. We built something together, a life, a family, a fire that we both fed, that we kept burning through the winters when everything outside seemed designed to extinguish it. I had friendships that felt, at the time, like the truest things in my life outside of my marriage. Men who had stood beside me when grief arrived. Men who had held me up when the weight became too much for one person to carry alone. At 40 years old, I looked at what I had built and I thought, this is the reward. This is what loyalty returns. This is the life that fidelity and trust and the keeping of promises construct, brick by careful brick, over years. I was right about the fire. I was catastrophically wrong about who was feeding it. And wrong even more dangerously about who had been quietly, patiently, with every appearance of love, pouring water on the coals when my back was turned. Let me tell you about the year I almost became the person I was supposed to be. I was 31 years old, young enough that the future still felt like a door that was open rather than one that was slowly, almost imperceptibly pulling shut. Old enough to know what I wanted, to have moved past the diffuse hungers of a younger man and arrived at something specific and real. There was an opportunity in front of me. I want to be precise about this because I have spent decades watching people dismiss the dreams they abandoned by calling them fantasies, by insisting the timing was wrong or the idea was flawed or the risk was too great. This was none of those things. This was a real opportunity, concrete, grounded, built on years of knowledge I had accumulated quietly and without applause, in a field I understood with the depth and intimacy that some men reserve for their religious practice. I had the knowledge. I had the vision. I had a specific, detailed plan that I had spent months refining in notebooks I kept hidden under my bed like a man keeping a secret from himself. I had a modest but real sum of money saved through years of choosing discipline over comfort, of saying no to small pleasures so that one significant thing might one day be possible. The door was open, the path was clear, and I was standing at the threshold ready. And then I did the thing that men of my generation, men of my background, men raised inside the particular fortress of family loyalty, always do. I asked for permission. Not in those words. I told myself I was asking for advice, for counsel, for the wisdom of people who knew me and loved me and wanted the best for my life. But underneath the language, it was permission. It was a grown man, 31 years old, with fire in his hands and a plan in his head and the full capacity to make his own decision, walking to the people who raised him and asking, "Is it all right? Is this allowed? Do you approve of the man I'm trying to become?" My brother sat across from me at the kitchen table, the one where we had eaten every childhood breakfast, where our mother had said grace, where our father had read the newspaper and occasionally looked up to offer pronouncements about the world that we had accepted as law, because he was our father and because we were children who did not yet know the difference between wisdom and the confidence of a frightened man. My brother looked at me the way older brothers look at younger ones when they believe, completely and without doubt, that they are saving them from something terrible. He said with the full weight of family authority in every syllable, "This is not for men like us. We are not built for that kind of risk. Stay where you are. Stay where it is safe. Stay where the people who matter already know your name. Men like us." 3 words. And somehow those 3 words had more power over me that day than everything I had ever studied, everything I had ever planned, every hour I had spent constructing a future that felt genuinely mine. Because he was my brother. Because love felt like authority. Because when someone who has known every version of you since the day you arrived in the world tells you who you are and what you are capable of, there is a terror in disagreeing with them that goes beyond logic. It goes all the way down to the foundation, to the question of whether you can trust your own eyes. I folded the notebooks. I placed them in a drawer. I told myself it was wisdom. I told myself it was love. I told myself that the brave thing, the mature thing, the responsible thing was to stay. 3 years later, a man I had never shared a meal with took the same idea and walked through the same door I had been standing at. He became wealthy. He became free. He built the life I had drawn in the margins of those hidden notebooks, and then closed away like something that had to be killed to protect everyone around me. I watched from a distance. I said nothing. I told myself the story men tell themselves when the alternative is too painful to hold, that the timing would not have worked for me, that he had advantages I lacked, that my brother had been right, and I had been lucky to be saved. But there are things you believe in the daylight that become transparent as glass at 3 in the morning. And for 40 years, in the quiet hours before dawn, I knew with absolute certainty what I had really done. My brother had not saved me. He had kept me. There is a difference between those two things. A difference as wide and as final as a grave. But that wound, as deep as it went, as many mornings as it cost me, was not the deepest wound. The deepest wound came later, and it came dressed in the clothing of something I would have trusted with my life, because for 38 years I had trusted it with everything else. His name was Marco. I met Marco when I was 26 in the careless, accidental way that the most significant relationships of a life tend to arrive. We worked in the same building. We discovered at lunch one day that we were reading the same obscure book. And we laughed at the coincidence the way young men laugh when the world seems to be arranging itself specifically for their benefit. What followed was the kind of friendship that poets write about, and most people never actually experience. Not the polite, maintained friendships of adult life, the ones built on shared schedules and mutual convenience. The real kind. The kind where someone sees the actual person behind the presentation and chooses to stay anyway. Marco was the first person I called when my son was born. He stood in the hospital corridor beside me at 2 in the morning, both of us unable to speak, both of us crying without embarrassment or apology. And I remember thinking that a man who stands beside you like that is as close to family as a person who isn't blood can ever become. For 38 years, Marco was my witness, not the self I showed to the world, Not the version of myself I constructed for professional spaces or family gatherings or the ordinary social performance of daily life. The real self, the frightened one, the one with doubts and failures and old wounds that had never fully healed. He knew about the notebooks. He knew about the brother and the kitchen table and the door I hadn't walked through. He knew things about my marriage that I had never spoken aloud to anyone else. When my mother died, he came to my door before I had even thought to call him, as though grief had sent him a message I hadn't. I would have put my hand in fire for Marco. That is not a figure of speech. I mean it with the precision and the weight of a man who has had 63 years since then to examine what he actually believed in that moment. I would have burned, and then came the winter of my 63rd year. I had an investment, significant, the kind that had taken 20 years of careful, unglamorous discipline to accumulate. 20 years of choosing the smaller thing, the quieter life, the longer road, all of it channeled toward a single point of possibility that had finally, after all that patience, arrived. I did what I always did with anything that mattered. I told Marco. I sat across from him at the same kitchen table where we had talked through every crisis and celebration of the previous 4 decades, and I told him everything. My fears, my excitement, the specific, particular anxiety that lives in the body when something genuinely important is finally within reach and you are terrified of reaching wrong. He listened the way he always listened, with his full attention, leaning forward slightly, the way a man leans towards something he genuinely cares about. He asked careful questions. He offered measured encouragement. He told me he thought it was sound. He told me specifically that he had looked into something adjacent himself and found the broader landscape promising. He did not tell me that he had already invested. Weeks before our conversation, Marco had placed his own money into the same opportunity, and the decisions he had made in doing so, the specific way his involvement was structured, had created conditions that I knew nothing about and that he understood perfectly well. Conditions that, when the investment collapsed, ensured that the damage fell almost entirely on people like me. I lost what I had spent 20 years building, and Marco sat at my Christmas table that year and said nothing. He sat there the following year and said nothing. He held my hand at a funeral in the year after that and said nothing. The truth arrived the way truths that people are hiding always eventually arrive, sideways, through a conversation neither of us had anticipated, with a third person who assumed I already knew what Marco had never told me. I did not shout. I did not overturn the table or slam doors or perform the grief and rage that the moment perhaps deserved. I was 68 years old by then. I had learned that the loudest response to betrayal is very often the least useful one. I went home. I sat in my kitchen. I placed my hands flat on the table and I sat very still for a long time. And in that stillness, something came apart in me that I had been building my entire life. Not the money, not the investment, not even the friendship, as much as that loss would cost me in the years that followed. What came apart was the story. The one I had been telling myself since childhood. The one my grandfather gave to my father and my father gave to me. The one that said, trust the people who love you and you will always be held. That story ended in my kitchen at 68 years old, with my hands flat on the table in the quiet of a man who has finally stopped pretending. Here's what I want you to understand. Here is what all of this has been building toward. I'm not telling you these stories so that you will distrust the people around you. I am not asking you to become armored. I'm not suggesting that love is an illusion or that friendship is always a transaction dressed up in warmer language. I'm telling you these stories because the lesson I needed to learn at 31, and again at 63, and again at 68, is the same lesson I see my grandson fighting against right now. And it is a lesson that most people only learn when they are sitting where I am sitting. The lesson is this: the people who love you most are also, often, the people most capable of limiting you. Not from cruelty, not from malice, but because their love is entangled with their fear. Because their image of who you are is fixed at the age when they first formed it and never fully updated. Because watching you become something larger than what they have already decided you are requires them to revise a story about themselves that they are not ready to revise. Your brother who tells you that men like us don't take those kinds of risks, he is not protecting you. He is protecting himself from the discomfort of watching you succeed at something he was too afraid to attempt. Your friend who nods and encourages and then quietly makes his own move without telling you. He is not a monster. He is a human being who, in a critical moment, chose his own comfort over your trust. And that is a thing human beings do. Not all of them. Not always. But often enough that a wise person builds for it. The ancient philosophers had a name for what I am trying to describe. They called it the inner citadel. Not a wall built against the world. Not isolation. Not the cold armor of a man who has been hurt too many times and decided that the solution is to feel nothing. The inner citadel is something entirely different. It is the place inside yourself, built through discipline and self-knowledge and the honest examination of your own values, where your sense of direction comes from you, where your understanding of your own worth does not depend on someone else's confirmation, where the question, what do I actually believe, is answered in your own voice, not in the echo of every person who has ever told you who you are and what you are for. It is the fortress that my brother's fear could not have breached if I had built it in time. The thing that Marco's silence could not have cost me nearly as much, because my financial future would not have rested on a foundation of trust that I had never thought to examine. I am not telling you not to love people. I am not telling you not to trust. I am telling you to love people and also build the citadel, to trust people and also retain, always, the final authority of your own judgment, to listen to the people who love you and also reserve the right to look them in the eyes and say with kindness and without apology, I hear you. I understand your fear, and I'm going to do this anyway. There is a river near the village where I was born. I have not returned in 50 years. But I can still feel the cold of that water on my ankles in spring when it ran fast and high and cut its path through the valley with the patient, absolute authority of something that has never once questioned its own direction. The river did not stop to ask the rock for permission. The rock did not approve or disapprove. The rock simply was, and the river simply moved. And what the river left behind after years and decades and centuries of that quiet, relentless movement was a canyon. That is what I am asking of you. Not violence, not the dramatic abandonment of everyone who has ever loved you or limited you or loved you by limiting you. The slow, steady, unbreakable movement of a person who has decided to be themselves. Because here is the truth that I carry into whatever time remains to me. The graves of this world are full of businesses that were never built because someone sat across a kitchen table and said men like us. Full of songs that were never sung because the person who held them decided in the end that the approval of frightened people was worth more than the risk of becoming extraordinary. Full of conversations that were never had, truths that were swallowed back down, decisions that were made from the fear of other people's fear, rather than from the quiet, courageous authority of a person who knows their own mind. I do not want that for you. More precisely, I did not want that for myself, and I did not build the citadel in time, and so I am here at 94 years old carrying it, carrying the weight of the notebooks I closed, the door I didn't walk through, the friend I trusted too completely, the years I spent measuring my life against someone else's ruler. You are not my grandson, but you are here watching an old man attempt to give away the most valuable thing he has left, which is not money or wisdom or even experience, but simply the truth, plainly spoken, by someone who no longer has anything to gain from telling you what you want to hear. You are living inside a story that was written for you before you were old enough to object. The question is not whether that is true. The question is whether, today, you are willing to begin the long and sometimes lonely work of rewriting it. Last night, my grandson sat by my bed again. He was different this time. Quieter. The way a person is quiet when they have been thinking about something difficult and arrived at the far side of it. He told me he had made a decision, that he was going to pursue the thing he had been afraid to pursue, that he understood now, in a way he hadn't before our conversation, that the people who loved him were not wrong to love him and were not intentionally cruel in their fear of him becoming something they could not fully follow, but that their fear was not his inheritance. I looked at him and I felt something I do not have a clean word for. Not pride exactly, though that was part of it. Something older. The specific relief of a man who spent decades paying a price that someone he loves now does not have to pay. He is 25 years old. He has more life ahead of him than I have behind me at this point, and what I have behind me is 94 years. If you are watching this, you are somewhere in the long, open middle of a life that still has enormous space in it for the things you have been afraid to attempt. Trust your own voice. Build the citadel. Love people clearly, which means loving them with your eyes open, understanding that they are capable of fear and failure and the small betrayals that human beings commit against one another, not from evil, but from weakness. And in the quiet center of all of that, where no one else can reach, hold tight to the person you actually are. That person is the only navigator you have ever truly needed. I am 94 years old. My time is measured now in months, perhaps, in the small specific mercy of mornings that still arrive with some light in them, in conversations like this one, where I can still find the words and arrange them into something that might be useful to someone I will never meet. If what I have told you tonight is still moving inside your chest, if something in it has found a place it is not ready to leave, then you already know what to do with it. There are more truths where these came from. More accumulated years of hard-won clarity that I intend to give away before the giving is no longer possible. Stay close. Come back. You are exactly the kind of person these conversations are meant for. I do not have forever, but right now in this moment, I am still here. And so are you. That is enough.